Welcome to r/MaliciousCompliance, where we share stories of people conforming to the letter, but not the spirit of a request. Thank you, friends, for subscribing to the channel, and for so many likes. The first story. Professor was fired after my complaint, due to discrimination against students, including me. The second story. Boss ordered to save $34 million. The employee did this by dismantling the conveyor line. The third story. Department demanded that I update the table and give an effing explanation. I did it. And the first story is The Art of Humiliating My Public Speaking Professor in Front of His Boss. Cast: me, the majestic gummy bear; Sarah, my twin; Jane, Dean of the Art Department and Professor. I would like to say that I've omitted several details that I don't feel comfortable talking about, because they're centered around my family history. At the strong recommendation of Sarah and our therapist, I decided to go to a local community college this year, and to say that the enrollment process was difficult would be a severe understatement. I'm not going to go into full detail, but it was fairly hectic. All of my professors were nice and friendly, except for my public speaking professor. Uncle helped me work through the disabilities office, and I eventually received my official MSI, Modified Student Identification. Basically, I show it if campus security were to approach me, or if I have business with any department of the college, and they'll make sure that the necessary steps are taken so that I can communicate with whoever I need to talk to. I'm mute. Now, the list of accommodations I have is extensive, but the primary ones I have that are needed to know is this: exemption from assignments involving speaking or presenting work in front of the class. Family-provided translator as long as they're cleared by the disabilities office. They're understaffed and can't provide someone that can translate to sit with me in all my classes. Frequent breaks if I feel overwhelmed, due in large part to my anxiety with being near people I don't know. The second one isn't really important and doesn't have much to do with this, but the first and third are very important. Because I am mute, the exemption is a given and my professors have been very understanding. But my public speaking professor didn't even bother to look at my accommodations when I presented my identification to him on the first day of class. He spent the following week repeatedly threatening to have Sarah escorted off campus by security if she didn't leave the classroom. Both of us tried to tell him that I needed her, but he was adamant that he doesn't need to look up my accommodations. Professor gave all sorts of excuses for not looking them up. The most common excuse he gave was, I'm not required to look them up, but things came to a boiling point after he gave me an F for not doing the first speech he gave. Professor, you do realize that if you were mute, you'd be deaf. The fact that we're having this so-called conversation, I was writing down on a notepad for him to read, proves that you aren't mute. So, my decision to give you an F for that assignment is justified. Additionally, you'll have to file a grievance report if you wish to dispute the grade and have it removed. He also went on to explain that it would be pointless since I was already failing, apparently due to repeated disruptions of class by leaving and coming back. I was going into the hallway where Sarah waited, because I was getting overwhelmed by him repeatedly calling me out in class, and flat out telling me to contribute or get out of his class. It was because of that reason that I went a little further while filing the grievance. You see, there were several extra boxes that allowed me to write in additional notes if there were multiple disputes. They basically wanted you to go into as much detail as possible, so I filled out several of those boxes detailing everything from threatening to call campus security, to have Sarah escorted off campus, to the grades he had given me being avoidable if he took some time to check my accommodations. It took 3 days before I got the email notification for the meeting with the Dean of the Art Department. When we showed up to the office, Professor was sitting in the waiting area. I didn't pay much attention to him, but Sarah told me that his smug smile disappeared when I showed one of the secretaries my MSI, and the secretary asked for one of his coworkers to come check me in after entering my ID number into his computer. The secretary who helped me began printing out some paperwork. I later learned that it was my student file, and took them into Jane's office. Not even 4 minutes later, Jane calls for Professor to come into her office. We aren't sure what they talked about, but after we were called in, Jane told Professor that he owed me an apology, which he grudgingly gave. All of the bad grades for that class were dropped, and Professor was told that the campus guidance counselor would be paying our class a visit to talk about how his actions are not accepted on the campus. We later came to find out that he ended up losing his job on account of student discrimination. Apparently, I'm not the only student he's been doing this to. The second story is, you want me to save the company $34 million a year? I'll just do that and get you fired. This is a story that's somewhat legendary around my mine site that I work at, and I think it belongs here. One of the big bosses, we'll call him BB, around the site decided to be a smart A one day and instructed someone a level below him, we'll call him AA, to save the mine $34 million a year. Here's what's important. BB said he didn't care how he did it. He told AA to just get it done or else he'd make sure they'd lose their job. Now, AA had been putting up with SH from this BB for the past few months. There's a code of conduct and responsibility that needs to be followed, and BB worked very hard to find his way through every loophole possible that stopped him from slacking off. This includes dumping a fair amount of extra work into his employees, but the one in this tale of pro-revenge had it the worst. BB would constantly belittle AA on the mine radios, dump extra paperwork on him, including BB's own paperwork, make him drive other employees around the mine site when AA was already swamped with the extra paperwork, causing him to lag behind in his other duties that he was supposed to be doing. AA was no assistant. It was not his job to do BB's SH, and if he refused, BB technically could start the process of AA's termination through some BS loophole. So here's where it gets interesting. After BB instructed AA to save the mine $34 a year, AA figured out well that BB was trying to kiss the A of the higher-ups and make himself look good. However, instead of doing the work himself, he's once again dumped it onto AA, and AA had had enough. BB has his designated time off and comes back to find a massive, and I mean massive, this thing is one of the biggest production movers on site, conveyor line parked up miles away from where it's supposed to be operating, and in the equipment graveyard. If you haven't seen a conveyor line, think if a crane and a conveyor belt had an enormous love child. It has been disassembled and sits in 3 enormous pieces. It would definitely take a fair while to disassemble, at least a month or so, but it's not uncommon for employees to take a month or 2 of time off for various reasons, so I'm not too sure about that one. BB flies off the handle. He explodes. He gets onto the mine radios and screams for AA to get his A down there. AA rocks up, and when asked what in the hell he'd done, AA simply shrugs and says, "I pulled the conveyor out of production. It saves you $34 million a year." No matter what BB argued or how much he threatened, AA simply said, "You told me to save $34 million a year. I did just that." No matter how much money the mine would actually lose with this massive machine out of construction, AA did as he was told. Of course, the big bosses found out, and when they questioned BB about it, he pointed to blame to AA. Once again, AA stood his ground and said that he did as he was told. Once BB confirmed what he had instructed AA to do, it wasn't long before BB was sacked. He packed his stuff and walked out of the gate that same day. AA still happily remains, stress-free and not to be effed with. BB was an A all around. Maybe if he was nicer, he could have gotten off with a severe warning, but one less bully around the mine site is definitely for the best anyways. The last story is 2 for 1 because this department just can't get its act together. I work in financial aid for a 4-year university, specifically in scholarships. Part of my job duties includes providing some of the STEM departments with information about student budgets, so they know how much they can award their students in scholarship funds. Thanks to some dumb aerie in one of those departments, I ended up with a 2 for 1 malicious compliance. Number 1. So one of the awards they give students is a stipend for on-campus jobs, which comes with an in-state tuition waiver. Pretty sweet deal. Work 19 hours babysitting the computer lab, or whatever. Get a paycheck and pay less than half your original tuition and fees. Problem is, as we found out in a meeting with them last year, they weren't making the students work the minimum hours required to qualify. They were signing off on timesheets saying they worked those hours, but the hours weren't worked. I think the reasoning they gave was, they're adults with families and classes and homework. They're too busy or something. B, me too, but I still show up for my 40 hours a week and hold down 2 classes. Anyway, we were understandably concerned about this fraud and asked, is that legal? It is not. We were told not to worry about it. They totally know what they're doing. Compliance. We didn't worry about it. We just let them do their thing. Maliciousness. It bit them on the A is when the office that puts the waivers on student files caught wind of this, and none of the students got the waiver for an entire semester. Students who had been guaranteed, and only come to our school because of, scholarships for their full cost of tuition and fees, when the department was still obligated to honor, even though it was well over twice the cost they had originally budgeted for. Number 2. So remember how I said part of my job is providing information about student budgets to this department? Well, because of that, I ended up directly in the path of some of the fallout from the epic budget implosion of 2018 in number 1. Part of this was because the department was under the impression that my office handles the waivers. We do not. So I was forwarded a strongly worded A-chewing basically saying that my office needed to fix our mistake and get those waivers back on because it had completely effed their budget. I was forwarded this email twice. My boss called them up to explain that this was 1, not a mistake, 2, not handled by our office, and 3, they had no business harassing me about it. Props to my awesome boss. Anyway, because of this epic budgetary implosion, suddenly this department doesn't understand the spreadsheet of budget information I sent them, despite it being in the exact same D format it's always been in. They asked me to recalculate the budgets with in-state tuition amounts. That's what it already shows, and there's literally a footnote at the bottom explaining that that's what a column is showing. They requested this 2 more times. At this point, I assumed they were asking for something else, and I had just misunderstood the original request. So I update the spreadsheet to include a column of the actual tuition adjustments, if they were different from the amount calculated assuming the waiver was in place. Meaning I actually gave them exactly the opposite of what they were asking for. Budgets without the waiver. Next day I get a call from them saying they don't understand the spreadsheet. I misunderstand again and think they want the entire budget recalculated to reflect reality instead of the happy fantasy world, where their students were all paying in-state tuition. Again, the happy fantasy world is where the original spreadsheet lived. Each successive request has accidentally moved us further and further from it. So I update the spreadsheet again. I also highlighted the column showing what the amounts would be with the waiver and highlighted the footnote, explaining that's what it was showing. Because even though I wasn't understanding what they were asking for, I also got the impression that they didn't understand this column. I got another effing call, preventing me from going on my lunch break, and spend about a half hour to an hour trying to explain this effing spreadsheet. I agree to do a breakdown of the previous semester and the current semester. I feel like it's at this point that I should mention I'm a graphic design major, explaining basic math to the accounting department for a STEM department. Take a moment to let that fully sink in. At this point, I've received 6 requests for clarification of basic math from people in a STEM department. We've been going back and forth over this for a week and a half. It's Friday and I'm done with their BS. The malicious compliance. You want clarification? I'll give you effing clarification. So I updated the spreadsheet again, only this time I broke down everything. This spreadsheet became my glorious monument to spite. It clocked in at 29 columns, 8 footnotes, and 2 formula breakdowns explaining the math I'd used to get the information on those columns. Every asterisk and footnote was highlighted and color-coded. I had my boss check it over to make sure I hadn't messed anything up. I stayed an hour past the end of my shift and finally sent this spreadsheet detailing my exact level of done with your SH. In my email, I told them that if they still don't understand, then we need to schedule a meeting to figure out exactly how bad their lobotomies had gone, that they couldn't understand this baby-stepped information, but in professional words. I explained that the spreadsheet had a breakdown of annual, fall 2018, and spring 2019. I pointed out that the asterisks existed and were color-coded to match their clarifying footnote and exactly which columns they were in, and that the footnotes are to explain what's in that column. I told them I thought the information they were looking for was in column Z, but I wasn't sure, and explained what the column had showed. I'd like to say that they got the point when I sent them a spreadsheet that goes out to column AC. I'd like that. Next workday, I got a call from them, asking for clarification, FML. After that, my boss said we're not doing this again, and they'll just have to figure things out themselves, with the usual information we give them come time for the new spreadsheet. Edit. No worries about documentation though. I have a Word doc on my work computer detailing the timeline of this harassment, including screenshots of emails. My A is sufficiently covered and my boss has my back, and is very unimpressed with their behavior both now and when she was the one doing this job. If they decided to BSH to me again, I and my boss will absolutely be having a chat with them, and anyone else we need to about what is and isn't appropriate behavior. Currently, I'm just documenting everything in case they push it that far. I hope you enjoyed these stories. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Have a nice day!